Are you trying to establish your brand as a thought leader? Start a podcast, invite industry experts to be guests on your show, and watch your brand become the prime resource for decision makers in your industry. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles, Director of Partnerships here at Sweetfish Media. I am very excited for today's Behind the Curtain episode. This is a first on B2B Growth. I am actually joined by the one and only Andrew Hurley, our Director of Operations here at Sweetfish. Andrew, how you doing today, man?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, man. It is great to have you on. Before we jump into today's topic, we're going to be talking about 3 ways to get more stuff done. I think a lot of people are thinking about New Year's resolutions right now. They're thinking about goal setting. So I think this is going to be timely for a lot of folks. Before we dive right in, could you share with listeners, since this is your first time on the show, a little bit about what your role is here at Sweetfish, man?
Yeah, sure. So I became the director of operations back in August for our team. So I was an account manager and a writer before that, but then officially transitioned over to that role a couple months ago. So yeah, I am from the Boston area, brief detour, lived in Nashville for a little while, but do have my roots in New England, went to school here, have, lived here for a little while. So it is good to be back and great to be part of this team.
Yeah, it is great to have you on this team, man. Even though you are a Patriots fan, you and I obviously differ, and we won't go off on that tangent because it's not been a good year for my Broncos. So anyway, I digress. But really excited to have you share some tangible value with listeners, man, because I shared this in a previous Behind the Curtain episode, or maybe it was a book review episode that James and I did on Radical Candor. A lot of that book is about communication, but Kim Scott touches on briefly there how to create a culture of innovation, and this idea that 1,000 small innovations are much more difficult to copy than one big idea. And I think you have helped us move in that direction by getting more things done. We have a lot of creative people, and I'm sure there are a lot of listeners to this show that have very smart people on their team. They have very creative individuals and collections of teams that have a lot of innovation within their walls. And that doesn't necessarily always equate to reaching your goals or implementing those innovations. So we're going to be talking today about 3 ways to actually get more projects, get more process changes, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, get more of those things actually done. So before we get into those 3, tell us a little bit about what you did in implementing what we call our leadership team project board, Andrew.
Yeah, sure. So when I came aboard in August, we were going through a lot of growth at that time. So you had come aboard, maybe a month or 2 before that, and had started closing a lot of deals. And so obviously that was awesome, but we didn't have a ton of kind of organizational and operational infrastructure in place. And so at that time, we were having a little bit of a hard time just keeping up with some of that growth. So there were not a lot of kind of standard operational procedures in place. So there were seemed to be a million things that we needed to get done. And so we needed a way to kind of organize all of those thoughts and make sure that we captured everything that needed to get done, but then also kind of systematic way to approach those. And obviously we can't get everything done at the same time. So what I did was I just created kind of a simplified version of a Kanban type of work flow, this is a very simplified version of that, but we use Trello for our project management. So I just set up kind of a simple board where each of our kind of, each member of our leadership kind of had their own backlog of things to do. So anytime we thought of something that needed to get done, we would put that in the backlog. And then we would move it through the lanes of getting done. So we'd move it to an in progress, lane when we were working on it. And then when it was actually finished, we moved it over to done. So it sounds very simple in practice, but it helped us really just focus on, what we could prioritize in terms of getting done. And then everybody could see what, each individual is working on at the same time. And then it helped us really get that sense of accomplishment when we move things to done. So even though we've kind of built a lot of that infrastructure in place now, there's obviously still a bunch of things that we work on, as a leadership team. And so we still use that board, quite often to get projects done. So that's the kind of system I put in place to help us move towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it gives you visibility to your own goals, but as you touched on real briefly there, Andrew, it gives us all visibility into what each individual on our leadership team, each of their lanes, which is basically a list in Trello, whether it's, the sales backlog, the customer experience backlog, marketing operations, we each have a to-do list, and we can see in each other's backlogs where we might be able to help each other out. And I know you'll get into a little bit more how to get stuff moving through there, but I think that visibility is so key. I've just been reading Your Best Year Ever by Michael Hyatt, and he talks about something that we all know, that writing your goals down does increase your odds of actually achieving those. The second step, I think, is some accountability. Often pushes us towards goals that we want to achieve. And I think, this does this as well. So let's get into some specific ways. Now that we've kind of got that foundation, it doesn't mean that you're instantly going to accomplish everything. So I know there are 3 specific ways within this system, or whatever goal setting system that you're using, that people can take advantage of to get more things done. And the first thing is about how many projects people should be taking on at any given time, right?
Yep. Yeah. So that first tip is really just to be able to focus on 2 to 3 projects max at a time. So it can be really tempting to want to implement everything at the same time. So we've been, as a team, for in the month of January, going to be reading through the book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution. And one of the quotes, from that book is along the lines of, basically, there's no shortage of good ideas. It's just a matter of, prioritizing them, because you can't get everything done at the same time. So obviously still in Sweetfish today, if I could snap my fingers and make a lot of changes, with our AM team, just in terms of, new processes we want to roll out, and, different HR things or whatever, if I could snap my fingers and have it all done at the same time, obviously I would. But, the reality is that you can't. But really what you're able to do is if you focus on really 2 to 3 projects at the same time, rather than 4 or 5, getting into double digits, you're actually seeing the progress happen. It'd be the same thing if you're reading, 7 books at the same time. It can feel like forever to get through any of those. But if you really just focus on just a few and chipping away at those, then you really start to see progress. So, and then another reason that we only focus on a couple at the same time, specifically when it has to do with changes for our account management team, is that people really do need a little bit of time to adapt to change. So we're a company that changes pretty quickly, and tries to implement a lot of the feedback that we get from customers and from our own team internally. But it can be really jarring if you try to implement just a million things at the same time, and people say, okay, well, what's actually the most important here? So we try to only focus on a couple changes at the same time. So we, one, get them done, and then also show how important they are, and that's the priority that we're really focusing on at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. So let's jump right to the second one. So that is prioritizing finishing instead of starting. Can you tell us a little bit about this mindset shift, I guess?
Yeah, so I would say this is probably, the most important thing that, if somebody's listening and they just want to implement one thing, or kind of one question they can ask themselves every day, I would say just ask the question, what can I finish today? So that really is the focus on finishing a project and seeing it through to completion rather than starting a new project. So this really just gives you a huge sense of accomplishment, and you actually see projects getting done. So it's really easy to be distracted by that new shiny idea that comes through and, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could do this today, get this new project kind of implemented. But if you really focus on getting things done, it gives you just this huge sense of accomplishment. And a lot of times if we're working on, a ton of projects at the same time, or kind of always get distracted by the newest thing, we really get that sort of spinning your wheels feeling. And I think we've all had this where, you end a day, it's, 6 o'clock in the evening and you're like, what did I even do today? I don't even know what I got done today. But if you really focus on finishing instead of starting, and you actually have a board like we do where you move those cards from in progress to done, you can look back and be like, yeah, this past week I got these 3 things done. And it just gives you that big boost of, we're actually making progress here.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I'm no financial expert, and, I'm not putting any, endorsement behind, his methods or not. But one of the things that I've thought was interesting, just recognizing our own psychology in Dave Ramsey's financial advice is as he talks to people about, their debt snowball. And that's probably, a New Year's resolution that a lot of people have is in the area of finance. He talks about, yeah, it could make financial sense to tackle your highest interest rate debt first, but start with your lowest so that you get that sense of accomplishment and you get the ball rolling. I think that carries over into these sorts of projects and process changes, whatever it is that you're trying to get done, to give ourselves, those wins. Because I definitely can relate to what you're talking about, that shiny object syndrome. And I think a lot of folks in our generation can relate to that, and just everybody in general in the world that we live in today, right?
Yeah, of course.
So the third one you wanted to talk about, Andrew, is removing blockers. So we're obviously going to have obstacles. We're going to have challenges either that we foresee or ones that we don't in whatever we're trying to get done, short or long-term goals. So what is some of the advice that you have for folks around getting over, around, through, whatever you want to do, getting past those obstacles that are going to come up?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple studies that are done on, the amount of time that it takes for projects to get done. And a lot of times, the length that it takes a project to get done is just that somebody's sitting on it, so no work is actually being done on a project at the time. So it just kind of sits there and, no progress is being made. So I kind of view the concept of blockers in 2 different ways. So either somebody is kind of a blocker on your project, is kind of blocking something that you've kind of spearheaded to getting done, or at the same time, it's very possible that you could be a blocker on somebody else's project getting done. So basically, that just means that, if it's a tennis match, the ball has been hit back over to your court, or you have hit the ball back over to somebody else's court and they just haven't hit it back, or you haven't hit it back. So really one thing that we've done to kind of combat this is we just recently started these, what we call grooming meetings for the project, the leadership team project board. And really what we're doing is we're just identifying where the blockers are. So say you're working on a project, Logan, and really some you're kind of spearheading it and no progress has been made for a little bit. And then we kind of investigate and say, oh, it looks like Andrew's kind of been sitting on this for a little bit. Maybe he was waiting for more information or something like that. This kind of just paves the way for clear communication and figuring out, where we are blocking each other. So I guess, one thing that you can really kind of either vow yourself or ask of other people is, I will kind of take it upon myself to try to not be a blocker for other people's projects. And then if somebody's kind of sitting on what your project is, just to kind of clearly communicate with them, that they might be keeping the project from kind of getting across the finish line. So sometimes there's also just, different priorities. So say you hit the ball back over to me and it's, I'm working on a project and really, it's just not a priority for me to work on. That's what we can talk about in these grooming meetings, is kind of reordering the, how we're prioritizing these different, projects that we're working on. And maybe this needs to go back to the backlog, and maybe this doesn't need to be worked on for the next couple of weeks. So basically, just opening these lines of communications and making sure that we're always talking with one another about what needs to get done next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it brings some accountability. It also brings some collaboration and cooperation. If there's something that you and I were working on together and you have a couple things ahead of what you're working on with the project that we're tag teaming that have a higher priority, and legitimately do, maybe we push that back a bit, we push the due date, or, we go to another team member and say, hey, Ryan, you could help with this right now.
Right.
This makes more sense. So there's a lot of things that can come out of, those quick sessions to look at everyone's backlog together and kind of groom everything, as you put it, that we're all working on. So I think that's fantastic advice. Andrew, anything else, whether it's New Year's resolutions, business growth goals, anything else along these lines of getting things done you'd like to leave listeners with today, man?
Yeah, there's just one other just short thing, just in terms of project management, sometimes it is necessary to have somebody on your team to just kind of nudge these projects along and kind of, see it from a, kind of a holistic point of view. And so I would just encourage people that are in project management to, not be afraid to kind of nudge people along. And so you can do it in a way that isn't obviously annoying your team and pestering them and saying, why haven't you gotten this done? It's more of a thing of like, hey, let's just open the line of communications. If something's happening where, a project isn't getting done, maybe it's just not a priority for people at that time, and just really opening communication there and seeing what needs to get done. But yeah, to just not be afraid to move that ball along, because it really is a very important role to just, keep nudging things along and reminding people to, work on those, and then offering help if they need it as well, and just kind of aligning resources so that we can get more projects across the finish line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it, man. I think you've done a great job, man, of being pleasantly persistent internally, because we all need, that coach, that cheerleader, right, that person alongside us. I've heard it said before that the greatest coaches are the ones that get us to do what we never wanted to do, to be the player we always wanted to be. And I think that holds true, in business and personal productivity as well. We need that accountability. We need those nudges. Obviously, you've got to feel out your team, and you've got, relational things to think about, but that's a conversation for another day, and on how you work internally and all of that communication. But I love what you're sharing here. I think it's very, very applicable for a lot of folks who are looking towards 2019 and trying to accomplish more than they did this year, probably have some massive goals. So I think this episode is going to be very valuable for listeners. If anyone listening to this would like to stay connected with Andrew or myself, feel free to look us up on LinkedIn. We're very active there. Logan Lyles, Andrew Hurley. Andrew's last name is spelled Hurley, or shoot us an email. We love hearing from listeners. You can reach us at logan@sweetfishmedia.com or andrew@sweetfishmedia.com. And as always, thank you so much for your attention. We really appreciate you listening. Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. All those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.